I'm going to leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions, and then a couple minutes for the panel members to wrap it up. First, I want to say to every man and woman that has served, is serving, is thinking about serving, we really appreciate the commitment and dedication in keeping this country safe. I will also say that if you haven't served, please consider it, because it's a job worth doing, and it tastes great, as I like to say, and you'll never regret it. With that, the chief came up here this afternoon and said a lot of things. I wrote down a couple of notes. 30 minutes to 2 hours to process an individual. Used to take minutes. 120 countries being represented that they're interacting with. $35 million worth of, I'll call it, revenue, just in human smuggling alone in one sector, right? And what did he talk about? He talked about the fact that they still don't have the coverage for the officer safety and capabilities. If they could just get the logistics to move the individuals out from apprehension into the detention centers, right, so that the officers could get back on the line and do their jobs. We'll talk about all of these things, but it's just remarkable to think about some of the basic things that are still not in place as they fight this daunting task. I'm going to start with, let's start with the Invent team. I can't resist. I would like you, Erick, to describe first what is the Invent team? What does the Invent team do for a living? We'll start there, and then we'll get into how they do it, how they interact with people, et cetera. But let's start with that.
Do I get 50 minutes for that conversation?
Yeah. And you need to do that in about 3 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Well, first and foremost, it is a privilege and honor to be here, truly humbling with the level of experience and speakers that are present at this event. So just want to start off with that. But to begin, so I work with the CBP Innovation Team under the Office of the Commissioner. We were founded back in 2018. Our charter and mission, and really mandate, is to identify, adapt, and deliver innovative commercial technologies to the field for the sole purpose of making our personnel more safe and more effective. I think that's really been the theme, right, that you've been hearing throughout today, is how our frontline personnel and workforce can be more effective in a contested, constrained, resource-constrained environment, in a harsh environment. And I think we'll get into the connectivity here in a little bit, but also one that just requires an imperative to innovate. And our team has the ability to interface with industry in some unique and diverse ways. We have various mechanisms that allow us to reach out and see what's out there. We have problem sets that we collect. We've heard discussions earlier today about requirements and how we form requirements, and how those can help us drive towards identifying problems. There's a lot of unique problems out there. A lot of them are hard to solve, and so we need solutions. We need ability to interface with industry. We need industry to interface with each other as well, and to listen to the operator, to listen to the agents that are on the ground. That is the ground truth. We know that because we're working with emerging technologies, that risk is inherent with that. We're 100% willing to move forward in ways that that may be noble failures. We may learn from industry and how certain capabilities end up being successful or not. But we look at rapid delivery. We're looking at 0 to 18 months to push a technology or push a capability out to the field. Our motto is iterate and improve. So I think it's important for industry to understand that your technologies and capabilities, they're not perfect. They're not going to be out there, and it's not going to be the perfect solution right away, right? You need to hear feedback from the operator, from the agents that are using it, letting you know how its utility is impacting operations and impacting the day-to-day life of our frontline workforce.
Okay, Eric, I appreciate that. Son, let me go to you. Chief Architect, what does the architect organization do? How does that fit into the picture here? Where do they fall into play in regards to ultimately getting some capability out to the field?
Yes, so architecture is very, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. I think you just sort of look towards it and it'll magically appear.
All right, that sounds good. So what I do is really trying to make sure that the technology that, Invent brings in and anyone that wanted to insert new technology into CBP is really aligned with the CBP IT governance model and also aligned with our enterprise architecture. So that's the point is to make sure that we have a way to maintain and manage the technology that is coming into CBP. So in the sense, how does it fit together? We have a technical reference model. We also have a technical insertion request model that we will vet the technology and we will work with the requester to make sure that the technology is fitting their need and also it's not going to create vulnerability or security issues within the enterprise. So that technology is really also helping the mission. It's not just like because I like to use this technology and then I will insert it into the CBP. Really, the alignment with enterprise architecture is very important so that we don't end up with a lot of technologies that only be used one time, but then we have to continuously patch and then make sure that it doesn't create vulnerabilities for CBP.
Or drill a lot of holes in the ground and have a maintenance nightmare.
Exactly.
Which,
yes.
So let me get industry's perspective here. Mark, I'm going to start with you. We heard the chief earlier. We heard several of the panel members earlier. We're hearing the panel members now. Undoubtedly, you're thinking, wow, I've got this technology. It's in the lab. I can deploy this. What's your thoughts here on what you're hearing in regards to the requirements out there, the gaps in the capabilities, and where industry can fit into that and insert themselves?
Yeah, I mean, again, it clearly the collaboration side of the equation. I mean, working with Erick's organization, understanding the architecture that's in place that you need to work with. I think one of the things that as you're looking at it, and we talked about it earlier, right? It's what are the outcomes that are out there, right? That you're actually looking to drive towards to meet the requirements that are in place today. I think from an industry perspective, I'm always looking at how can I challenge my own organizations to think about those outcomes, and then think about from at least in this equation here, with what the existing tool sets are that are in place, how do you maximize, how can you optimize within that structure that's in place with innovation that comes through in that, and frankly, where do we put our investments in there, but then how do we connect with CBP to have that conversation to make sure those investments are actually targeting a need and an objective at the end of the day. Requirements, we've talked about those requirements, we've messaged that, but frankly, there's still an objective that it's still trying to meet as we come out of those. I think for us, it's that collaborative approach across industry, and as sitting here with other industry experts, and how do we actually bring a partnership community to that dialogue? It's not just a single thread, right? We don't all have the answers, but how do we get the right industry partners together to actually solve gap dynamics that you're talking about and putting forward? So we try to push through that narrative and that dialogue to try to tackle those objectives.
So Erick, you kind of explained what Invent is. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what is the process that you use to, let's say, for example, address some of the very clear requirements that we're hearing from the operators, right? And we talked in our prep about, hey, we want to make sure we're thinking about the operator first, the officer first, the agent first. How does what you're doing in that rapid prototype address those needs sooner rather than later, presumably?
Yeah, absolutely. So, when we look at problem identification and problem sets. So we have three.
And if I may, maybe
Yeah.
get, if it's in the Petri dish, we'll say, get specific about, hey, what is going on with TACOM? What is going on with computing on the edge
Yeah.
inside of Invent?
Right. Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, let's use a real scenario, right? I mean, you're looking at the border environment, very harsh, very austere, very remote, limited infrastructure, if any, in some locations, limited LTE comm available. And so, we, all agents out in the field are carrying around, we've seen a couple of folks already today mention their phone, right? So we have a lot of personnel that are carrying around this device to help them with situational awareness. That situational awareness, though, they don't have full use of it when we don't have connectivity. And so when we are looking at industry, we're looking at a hybrid. We're looking at a hybrid approach of different type of solutions that can integrate with our existing systems, as well as reduce cognitive load on agents. We don't want personnel or CBP workforce carrying around a bunch of different devices. So form factor and all that, that's just a use case, right? Applicability. But our process in doing that is working with some strategic partners to let them know these are our problem sets. We have an agreement with them. They actually do tech scouting for us. They reach out. They have a great interface with industry. From there, we're able to have some very meaningful connections and look to see, does this capability really align with our mission? And then we move forward with a project lifecycle that would include, in simple terms, pre-deployment, deployment, post-deployment. And that really incorporates the iterate and improve cycle that really is driven by the frontline personnel, right? Their feedback, their use of it. So hopefully that.
So you probably have at least 50 companies here. They've been listening to a plethora of problems being identified. If they wanted to interact with the tech scouting team, I guess I'll call it that, how do they do that? What's that process? Is that a one-way where the scouts go out and scout and hopefully they get discovered? Or can they say, hey, listen, I heard the chief and we solved this problem in Israel and we can solve it here?
Right.
How does that happen?
Yeah, so there's several methods that we use, for industry specifically. We may send out a request for proposal, and we utilize other transaction authorities quite often as well, that are more.
What's that?
That
Just
is
so
a.
people understand what that means.
It's an ability for us to push a solicitation, which would go out to industry. That solicitation would detail the focus area that we really want to drive towards, and the use case. From there, we can interact with industry. Industry can also interact with each other. It's a non-FAR based mechanism that really drives innovation for us. And I think it's a great opportunity for industry to be able to connect with others, and that offers opportunity for integration, both between vendors and industry as well as within CBP.
Bogdan, have you ever been tech scouted?
Nope.
You're listening to all this. You had a lot of very thoughtful comments earlier. Thoughts on how can the Invent team be leveraged, or how is it being leveraged, or are there other ways to address some of these challenges? In particular, let's just talk about straight up basic communications, right?
Yeah.
It seems to me it was very obvious that in order to get that force multiplier 10x in regards to using AI, you've got to have connectivity to do it in large part. Talk to me.
Well, first of all, I think it starts with architecture, right? And the way you got to look at it is define an architecture, because communication is the fundamental of infrastructure that's required in order for us to be able to deploy any application or any intelligence or human assist to the field. Without comms, we can't do it. The challenge with comms is always, especially in these denied and semi-denied environments, is that there is no one vendor that can do it all based on size, power, coverage, bandwidth requirements, et cetera.
A lot of restrictions.
It's a lot of restrictions. And the other challenge, as it was just mentioned from Erick, is like, you don't want 5 devices on a person's backpack in addition to what they got to carry and they got to deal with. You don't want a lot more functionality that they need to worry about. You need the stuff to just work seamless. So I think the most important thing is define that architecture. How do you create, and I mean, we've been involved with DHS for quite a bit now, and one of the things that we do is comms, right? So it's a bit of a challenge to talk at a high level, but like in a high level perspective is, how do you bring the connectivity to the officer in the field in any environment they're in, and leverage the public existing infrastructure, public existing technologies, while also be able to put in private infrastructure as necessary to supplement the holes and the gaps that currently exist. To do that affordably, the Invent team would be able to help out by defining that as a problem set, first of all, and then second of all, not just the generic comms. It's more like, hey, this is sort of an architecture that we're looking at deploying, but more importantly, also working with the internal enterprise team to make sure that that all fits and is able to be deployed. Because the practicality is not the same thing as the theory. And there's a lot of companies out there that have, like, especially like I've learned this. We started out with an idea and a process and a thought that we had in the public domain. And we showed up in the DHS world and it's totally different. And there's a process to learn that. Not everybody is, like, you got to adapt to this. So I think it's an important process where the Invent team could help with industry to help them through that approval process, security infrastructure requirements, minimizing attack vectors, because the moment you're putting connectivity into the field, you got to have security. So it adds a lot more areas that you didn't have before.
Sir Saran, you talked about the technical reference model, and he just brought up several different items that really need to be considered. I'm sure that your team works very close with the Invent team when they're working on these rapid prototypes, but I'm just thinking about the industry here, the community. How, is it your organization that accounts for making sure that as something is moving its way, some technology is moving its way towards a technical reference model, that all those things that are being described here are being accounted for? Is that how that process works?
Yes, pretty much, we have a process for technical insertions, and from the insertion, it goes all the way into our technical reference model. But in reviewing every single thing, we have to be very careful about what we're inserting into the technical reference model. And we really have to run that technology with different evaluation criteria, particularly on the security side, right? So, and then we look at the industry to help us understand, is this technology, for example, on the dark web, or is it part of, some foreign countries' exploitation list and things like that. So we really hope that, putting a technology for the CBP use, for the agents use, but we also want to make sure that the technology is also safe and not causing any vulnerability issues when the agent or the field officers are using the technology. So security for me in the evaluation is a very important criteria.
So all of those things are being accounted for as it makes its way into
Yes.
technology assertion.
Yes.
Mike, I know that Red Hat is doing an incredible amount of stuff as far as edge computing, et cetera. No question that they're doing it in very, primitive areas. Perhaps they're doing it up in on the ISS. Who knows where they're doing it? Tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and potentially the solutions that may or may not be out there to run edge computing in a primitive environment.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to repeat myself from a little bit from my comments earlier, but the capabilities exist, right? And the need for edge computing has been driven by demand, right? So we've moved from the data centers to the cloud, and now we're all the way out to the mission edge, and the mission requires enterprise capabilities, right? And one of the things that came up today in a conversation out back is every portion of the edge, or the border rather, whether you're thinking about Mexico, whether you're thinking about Alaska, like I hadn't even considered Alaska today, and then Canada, this isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, right? And that's where open source, community, open standards comes into play, because we have to develop a malleable solution to this problem, right? We need platforms that we can then build capabilities on top of, where all the development happens out in the open, okay? So our entire portfolio has been refactored to meet the mission, whether it's our container platform, whether it's Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which is running on the space station, and also Microchip Kubernetes, which is going to be available on the edge to be able to run on small form factor compute. So all the capability is here, but now we as industry need to come together, vendors and SIs, to help our customer develop an open standard solution to serve the mission, to deliver the capability that the mission requires.
I appreciate that, Eric. I'm wondering about how these requirements are coming in. You all are taking said requirements, you're putting together some rapid prototypes, perhaps you're using some non-FAR capability in OTA. Looks great, you get the technology inserted, you've been working with Sanj Group. What happens next? Does an RFP come out on the street to supersize this thing into every Border Patrol station? Or how does that flow work? Assuming that you're looking at technology that you're looking to scale across the agency.
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So when we look at our project lifecycle, and we're working with industry and we're working with the field, we've got partnerships up at headquarters. We're working with OIT and Dr. Schmickel often at the hip for compliance and security and an integration standpoint. But when we're out there and we're doing a deployment, and if things are working well, it's looking that the technology is making an impact to operations. There's a part where we need to evaluate, what is the ability to scale this beyond low rate, production, right? Beyond this one geographical area. We heard mentioned earlier, you need to have an architecture of this network. Like, what does it look like? Well, that's going to be different from one station, one sector to another. You've been to one sector, you've been to one sector in the border environment. So there's a lot of variables at play, specifically related to that application. But overall, it's really based on the feedback that we're receiving, the ability of the vendor to listen to the folks on the ground to make some of those adjustments, modifications. And if things are working well, what our team does specifically is we have to have a transition owner. We have to have a business owner. That means, when we receive our appropriations and funding and we fund the entire initial deployment, we're also looking at getting us through that, what we call the valley of death. That part where we need to help the transition owner take this capability and incorporate it into their program of record, into our system of record. And so we fund 2 years of operations and sustainment. If things are working well, we have a desire from the field, we have a desire from the portfolio that's taking on this capability. And that helps as well the vendors and the companies help to continue to produce this capability. So that we can roll it out and we can actually scale it well across the CBP enterprise.
So I guess the results of the pilot, the prototype, get handed over to, we'll say operations, but operations typically, if I recall, is not going to actually do the solicitation. I would assume it's, in CBP's case, OIT that would then carry it from there and put out some sort of a solicitation for a nationwide rollout? Is that typically how that would work? Is that sort of the expectation?
Well, it really depends on with that particular use case, right? Like OIT and Invent, we're involved that entire process through that life cycle. I'm referring to a time where you've already identified, right, particular vendors that are providing their solutions to that space, to that very specific solicitation. A request for proposal or solicitation, that can come out from the business owner. They can push that. We could push that. DHS&T can push that. So there's various different programmatic offices and components within CBP and even DHS that can do that.
Okay, so it really does depend. Let's bring it down, not quite to bare metal, but we're going to bring it a little further down. Is there any current activity going on in regards to any kind of iteration, evolution of the TACCOM radio? Does the TACCOM radio potentially get usurped by a smartphone someday, and all of this capability, including local compute and maybe a little bit of AI and everything else, end up on a phone? Or does it happen in reverse? And then sort of layered on top of that, is there any accounting going on for the comms piece of this thing? Hey, we can make the most magical device and put it on the officer's hip, and it would be fantastic if he's in the building up at, the Ronald Reagan building versus in Lukeville. So let's start with just, is there any active project underway in the Petri dish to talk about sort of the evolution of the smart device?
Sure, do you want me to start?
Yeah, please.
Okay,
Or
yes.
anybody.
Yeah.
But let's start with you, and then let's have the industry sort of weigh in on, are you all looking at this? Have you thought about it? Have you done it for other customers? But please, yeah, Eric.
Yeah, so, when we're talking about communications, there's different modalities. There's voice communication, there's data, right? So in a lot of ways, when an operator's carrying around a phone, in a lot of ways, it's a map with dots on it that you can, of course, you can text, you can chat, and you can call if there's LTE. But getting situational awareness on where you are in time and space, as well as where other people are in time and space, is extremely important. Not taken away from mission critical voice. That is also extremely imperative for border security operations. So our particular invent is not particularly in right now with a project to do voice on one device, but I know there are programmatic offices that are looking at that. It's a difficult challenge. It's a difficult challenge to try to incorporate everything in one device in your phone, right? To do voice, to do encrypted voice, to do data communications and whatnot. So just a little insight there on we do see multimodal communications as extremely important. And we do need to start looking at like future state, what does an agent, what does an operator carry around in order to communicate with the world around them, with folks that they're working with, and whatnot. So it's pretty interesting. I think it's still a little bit of a ways out, but there are a couple initial efforts that are underway that not too privy about right now. But we do see some progress in that environment.
Sure. What is he carrying around versus what is he actually using? Sometimes two different things, oftentimes, or most commonly using. I'm going to ask the industry to weigh in on any of that if they'd like to, and then we're going to go to questions. Any thoughts from the industry on that?
I mean, just kind of building on some of that. I mean, again, you look at the geographic locations, the complexities, back to what is being communicated, voice, data, video. It's also what's the need right there, and how much of that needs to actually get reach back versus so, and how do you do that, right? I mean, it's refreshing to hear as we're thinking about, at least in our space, where our investments are going to go for our own IRADs, right? Where we're going to do our internal research into how much of that is how future looking versus in the next 0 to 18 months, right? And as we think about the communication side of this, you see it out there. You see Starlink popping up, but what are the SLAs with that, right? I mean, it's neat, but is that going to be something that's going to actually, one, hit the bandwidth needs that you need, and with all of the different sensors that are now out there and reporting back, for us as industry, how are we going to look at what's that right hybrid approach, not only a hybrid compute approach, but a hybrid kind of network comms approach that's going to be able to make sure that device is doing the right thing at the right time for the communication, and how do we integrate with what's already in place today, and whether that's a radio, a mobile device, don't have the answer for that, but those are the things that we're trying to look at to think about how do you actually get most efficient communications in there, not only near term, but in that longer term horizon. Knowing
Please.
capacity.
Yeah,
That's
and-
sorry. Let me just jump on that real quick too. Sensor integration is also really key and important. There's a lot of different existing technologies already out there. How do we continue to modernize and integrate with the existing systems that we currently have deployed, right? And so, as was just mentioned, one geographical area may have existing technology that's going to require a different bandwidth standard, right, or requirement. They may not need voice. They may need sensor integration and low bandwidth mesh radios to communicate. And so it really depends across the different border environment how to find a tailor-made solution.
Son, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, so one thing that I also want to raise is it's not just about, it's a very good observation about, bandwidth and then latency and things like that. But on the front line, our Border Patrol and field officers usually either carry a weapon, either carry something different. So I think the device, the comm device, has to take into effect the form factor, right? It cannot be too bulky. It has to be functional, useful, but yet easy to be operated, perhaps with one hand instead of, I use my two hands on my phone, but field officer or particularly Border Patrol agent usually have a gun on one hand,
Or maybe they have gloves on.
yeah, and
right?
then, yeah, so the form factor is somewhat important. I feel like the comms is very good. You press and you talk, and it's group talking, right? Instead of like you have to dial one by one on your cell phone, and then to get like a group of people talking together. So a lot of these things, it's in emergency, for example. Two-way comm, for two-way radio, right? You press and then you immediately talk, and then you talk to 10 different people, right, on the same wavelength. Versus, a cell phone, it does a lot more, but it requires you to do a lot more to communicate to a
There's a
group of
price to
people.
pay for that,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
Please.
So I find this problem exists everywhere, whether it's DHS, state and local law enforcement, statewide networks, and we're dealing with various government agencies, federally and state and local, where what's happening is this convergence of LMR
Yeah.
with broadband. And the challenge is the broadband demands are in such a way that LMR can never satisfy. It is impossible. But at the same time, the broadband capabilities are really powerful for the user, so they need them both. So it's a challenge of how do you augment LMR in a way to provide as much broadband as possible, if that makes sense. Now, making that in one device, there's people that are trying this. I mean, Motorola has put together the APX, whatever, 9500 or whatever it is, that's got an Android phone on the back of a brick radio that's on your hip. It's heavier. It has significant amount of cost to saturate. There's lots of things that go with it, but that's the challenge that the industry has to solve. It's a very difficult one. We have been addressing it in the sense of trying to provide a ubiquitous comms solution that sort of extends LMR more so than anything else, because I think if you've got voice, you've got the first level of communications, and if you've got some broadband, then you've got the next level up where you can start moving data back and forth, sensor information, and other things. And it really is like a layer cake, right? Where it starts with critical comms voice, critical data, which is things like AVL positioning, things like information about body, information about sensors around you, and then eventually get to things like Netflix, like if you really want to get there, because you got to kill the day. So, and there's really nothing going on. So the reality is really, how do you provide that in a architecture stack of importance based on the geographical area, as was described earlier, because yes, it's very different. Knowing one sector I would somewhat disagree that you don't know others. It's just that geographically, they're very different. Knowing one sector, you know one sector from a geographic perspective. But from an architecture perspective, it can be designed so it's across all of them at the same time. It's just, it's a big challenge. And, you know, in our case, we also deal with firefighters. This is something, it's a whole nother angle where you're dealing with heat, that's extreme heat and things like that. So all these little handsets.
Water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It really is fascinating to see the same problem across the entire spectrum of federal, state, and local law enforcement that simply exists. And we're finally at a point, because of AI and this massive amount of data that we've been talking about all day, it's causing the need of actionable intelligence that's needed for the officer in the field. That's how I would define it.
Fantastic. Let's get to questions from the audience. Fire away. Microphone, go. And please wait for the microphone.
Yeah, I do have a question for you guys on the communications aspect. I've got a family member. My dad deals with two-way radio communications for, you know, like law enforcement. And he's always making the case how, while we continue to gravitate towards phones and LTG and LTE technology, he's saying that two-way radios is essentially the future, in the sense that with limited broadband and complexities in the field with communicating, you know, often with radios you can use one hand to communicate with them. They're often more durable and you don't need broadband with it. So do you see more of a shift to developing two-way radio technologies with, you know, Border Patrol or ICE or any other agencies?
It's a hybrid. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, they both have to coexist. There's no way of them not coexisting. Two-way radios cannot provide you the capacity. They're 13 kilobits per second. 30 years ago, delivered 13 kilobits per second. And 30 years from now, it will deliver the same 30 kilobits per second. It's not a technology issue. It's a physics issue. So you can only do so much. If you want the range and the coverage, you're stuck with that. So the problem is, the more data you put on there that's more than 13 kilobits per second, which is mostly your voice, you need to do broadband. So they need to coexist.
Thank you.
Hi, Luke. Hi, team. Hey, Michael Saunders with GDIT. I want to talk about infrastructure in the southern border environment. And if I put myself in Zan's shoes as an enterprise architect, my view of architecture for infrastructure might be very different if I think of myself as the United States government versus simply the Border Patrol or CBP. Back in 2022, Luke, you may remember, OCIO came down to San Antonio at the Border Patrol Expo and briefed some initiatives to help CBP extend the DHS network into the southwest border environment by leveraging the other federal facilities that are co-located at times in the AORs. Think about Department of Justice, DEA. Can you give us an update? Have any of those activities led to progress? Is there any opportunity to think about a whole of the federal government approach to the southwest border infrastructure problem?
I don't know.
I can
Is there a
address.
federal, a non-FirstNet federal net out there somewhere?
So far up to today, I'm not aware that there is one, because Department of Justice, DEA, and DHS, and maybe CBP, we all have different sensitivity of data. We all have different sensitivity on the network. So making it a one net would require to solve a lot of these security issues. So law enforcement likes to keep their data separate from other agencies. You know, I do know that CBP keeps their data very, very secure, and also DHS. So I have not seen, and I'm not aware that there is one today. So just to answer your question, it's the reason is because everybody wants to keep their data and infrastructure secure in their own way. So.
Okay. Do we have time for a couple more questions? Okay. Got one up here in the front.
Thank you, because you set a perfect context for what we're rapidly approaching called TACOM 3. multi-agency contract dealing with all the diversity, open architecture, form factor, et cetera. Looking at TACOM 1 and 2, you had Motorola. U.S. Air Force, 6 other agencies. Now they're coming up for an MAIDIQ renewal, and we would love in industry to have an industry day to really discuss this landscape because it's rapidly coming upon us. And this is exactly, you've highlighted all the problems that are attended here. So, you know, just on the industry side, love to have this conversation because it's ripe.
So that's a formal ask out there to CBP for an industry day to take it to the next generation. Any other questions? All right, I wanted to give each of the panel members 30 seconds, final thoughts. Start with you, Saul.
So I really want to thank you for having me today. I learned a lot, and then you know, I would definitely bring a lot of these insights back. The particular thing is I really like to be partnered with the industry because I think there's a lot of innovation out there that we can learn and we can take back and serve the mission.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, I'm really grateful to be here and be part of this challenge. It's been a challenge. It's going to continue to be a challenge. Comms is not going to go away. I think there's more of getting together, more thoughts that need to be shared to be able to actually achieve a common goal, which is ubiquitous connectivity. We're part of it, but everybody else is part of it too. So it needs to be talked more and more about it.
Yeah, I mean, again, appreciate the opportunity to do that. I mean, we've talked about generative AI, the benefits that'll bring, making a border agent more efficient, more effective, and safer. But a lot of that does think about that communication, the backbone, and how you're structuring your data and the policies that underpin that. So I think those challenges are really on us to try to help collaborate and solve, because that's really how you're going to bring some of that to the tactical edge moving forward. But appreciate it.
Yeah, same here. Really appreciate the time and opportunity to come and talk to you all. I really think, you know, the industry has been making tremendous impact into our operations, and we've been making strides with communications, but, you know, continue to work on that and help us with that. Compatibility, shared situational awareness, interoperability is tremendously important. So thank you.
Yeah, so I think we've actually done a little bit of a discovery session here today where we've identified 2 separate workflows. Connectivity is not guaranteed, so we have to plan for that.
That's right.
We have to plan for disconnected scenarios. Now, is that a situation to where our officers are being equipped with different kit when they have to go into areas where there's going to be no connectivity? And also for the connected areas, can we plan for different functionality, different capabilities to be available? Right? So then those officers that are working in disconnected environments can say, hey, actually, I need to get back, but I still have my disconnected capability available to me to serve the mission. So I think that's important because the connectivity, even when we get to that state where connectivity is everywhere, there's always room for failure, and our officers need backup.
Absolutely. And before I forget, one last item, Erick, if the community here would like to reach out to you, to the Invent team, be involved in some of these prototypes, et cetera, what's the best way for them to participate? What's the best way for them to obtain information?
Yeah, good question. So we right now we do have a business connection portal that we utilize where folks can reach out and register, and we can have an opportunity to connect. I think that's probably the most efficient way to do that. Other than that, just be on the lookout for those opportunities and solicitations that may come out through RFPs or other means.
Don't forget what Mr. Ragland said about the foundation. That's super important. Don't forget what I said about public service. I assure you it takes great, and you'll never regret it. With that, thank you very much, panel members.